Hello and welcome. We're back live with this boat race trial for Cambridge, and you can see there the weather. Not many surprises on the weather front, looking pretty benign, Grace.
Yeah, I think they've got a good day, probably better than the trial eights last year from memory for the Cambridge women. So yeah, I think we'll definitely be able to see the best crews sort of put out their best performances.
Yeah, just on that graphic, I think we've got the right time for the women's race, 12:08, but obviously the men are not happening at the same time.
Yeah, 1:38 for the men's race a little bit later on. But good to be joining you again, Crossy. And like you say, beautiful conditions are here in Putney. You can see the sun is shining, the wind barely blowing, and the direction it is blowing in, slight headwind. So a little bit of resistance for these crews. And first up, Winnie the Pooh versus Eeyore in the Cambridge Women's Trial 8.
Yeah, and it's interesting, the names. I didn't know the background to these names, but what we did find out was that, of course, A.A. Milne, who fought in the First World War, had suffered from PTSD, and many of the characters in his books, like Winnie the Pooh, Eeyore, Tigger and Piglet, they suffered from various mental health disorders, and the Cambridge women wanted to publicise how important mental health is, particularly across the population, but also I think for those involved in this wonderful sport of rowing. So, you know, hats off for choosing those two names.
Yeah, and I think we've got two very different names on the men's side. They've gone more down the sort of historical Greek mythology route. Crossy, you're the historian here.
Yeah.
I don't know how much you know about Greek history, but talk us through the men's crew's name choosing.
I think that's Luca Ferraro, the Cambridge president. He's a historian, and he would have chosen the name of Scylla and Charybdis. And if you know the map of Italy, right at the toe, you've kind of got across the Straits of Messina, the very narrow strip of water. There are these two mythical monsters, Scylla and Charybdis, that mariners had to navigate around. The first one to do it successfully was Jason of the Argonauts, but Odysseus had to also navigate through that. And they were two ladies, unfortunately turned into monsters by gods, but yeah, there we go.
So as a water theme, a sort of rowing theme connection, and again we see so many different names used for so many different purposes throughout time with these trial eights. One of the really interesting and unique things about this whole process. But well, talking of unique, I guess every trial eights crew unique every year with the athletes that take part, and so we'll be introducing you to this year's contenders for the boat race seats. And what a contention it is. All of these athletes, these 18 athletes, fighting for their place in the Blue Boat next April. And we've got two crews here, Winnie the Pooh, who will be lining up on the Middlesex side, and Eeyore, who won the toss and went for the Surrey side. And Martin, some interesting choices in terms of, you know, where each of these athletes have been placed in the boat.
Yeah, I think the key one for Winnie the Pooh is the American stroke. Claire Collins, she's a Tokyo and Paris Olympian, fantastic athlete, and I think Paddy Ryan, the Cambridge coach, has probably put her there to kind of replicate the sort of rhythm that Megan Lee, who won the boat race for Cambridge earlier this year, set up. Gemma King, she is the 25-year-old whose sister's in the Oxford squad, and Gemma of course won the boat race again this year, one of the two blues.
I mean, Gemma has got to be one of the most experienced oarswomen across both boats here. This is her 6th boat race campaign. She started in the lightweight side, has moved through sort of Blondie, and as you say, a winner from last year's Blue Boat. So again, loads of experience there in the bows for Winnie the Pooh. And my eyes, again, speaking of experience from boat races, one of the only other returners across the two crews, I noticed Caris and Earl in Eeyore, who will be looking to defend a title in the Blue Boat next year, I'm sure. Great person there to be backing up Sammy Morton, the Australian, who was the reserve for the Paris 2024 team this year.
Yeah, I know. She's fascinating, Sammy Morton. I saw her at the challenge, and her nationality. She was born in Mexico, and I think she's got Australian and Swedish heritage. So she's one of the few athletes here that have got Australian, Swedish, and Mexican, 3 nationalities. I'm like, how does that work? But obviously.
And she learnt to row in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's a good shout.
But yeah, plenty of athletes from all across the world here. One of the beauties of the boat races, we get people travelling to do their degrees at Cambridge and Oxford. And yeah, plenty of nationalities featured here, Crossy.
The only thing I haven't worked out, because I couldn't find it on social anywhere, is why Jessica Spain has got Beanie in brackets in the middle of her name. Irish and British nationality. But if you do know why Jessica has got Beanie there, I'm sure it's a nice name or nickname or something. But then do let the boat race know on social, and we'll bring it to you.
Yeah, so we'll refer to it as Beanie Spain. Why not? I feel like that it wouldn't be there if we weren't supposed to be using it. But again, I think across these two crews, Crossy, looking at the only thing we've got to go off this year so far really is the Head of the Charles, which Cambridge travelled to in October. It's a huge race, huge international meet-up that takes place in Boston, one of the biggest rowing head races in the world, and Cambridge sent both a crew and a reserve crew, in inverted commas, out there, and the top crew have been split completely equally, 4 across Winnie the Pooh, 4 in Eeyore, so it really does look like Paddy here has quite carefully tried to match these 8s.
Yeah, I mean, he was pretty insistent, talking to Matt Pinson, who will be umpiring this, as he will the women's boat race, that he wanted a really good race. Matt said, well, what if one crew gets, a long way in front of the other? And, Paddy said, well, they shouldn't, because that's how it selected them. So, absolutely, really tight. The Head of the Charles was a super campaign for the Cambridge women. They didn't win like the men, but they had a lot of distance between them and the dark blues.
Yeah, and this will be, like Grace mentioned earlier in our sort of pre-show chat, that this is one of the only opportunities that these crews will get to battle head-to-head for the entire length of this course. And Grace, for you here, these crews are about to spin, get onto the start line. What is that preparation like? What is that moment like to try and get right, to mimic race day? This, the 16th of December 2024 is the only practice run they've got at this, really.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Obviously, the actual race is really important, but you actually don't think about it when you're sitting at home watching on TV about all the other little things that they're out there learning today, like getting to the start line in time. This part of the race we're looking at now is really quite difficult. The coxswains need to be so onto it so they're not panicking their crew that they're late or they're in the wrong place. And with the stream, if you haven't witnessed what the stream is like on the Tideway, it can be quite different than a usual rowing experience. So I found it a lot to deal with. There's a lot more to think about than your standard 2K race.
Matthew Pinsent there with his megaphone and well dressed up, because it's fairly benign here, the conditions, compared to last year. I mean, the Cambridge women rowed their race in a storming headwind off the start, and they were taking on a lot of water. These crews aren't going to take in any water, but there's a shot of a training crew of the crew at Hammersmith Bridge, and that's the start we're looking at, the famous Putney Bridge landmark that soon, 12:08, so they should be coming down in a minute or two, and there we go. And hopefully we have got the Middlesex crew, which is Winnie the Pooh, and they're on the right of your picture, and they should be wearing kind of whitish coloured tops to distinguish them from their club mates in the crew Eeyore on Surrey, and that is distinguished with, I guess, Louis Deneve, the coxswain. He's very, very tall. He's around 6'1". He should quite easily see over his stroke Sam Morton, and they're on the left of your picture. That's the Surrey station, and we'll talk about that as the race goes on.
Yeah, and these moments here, this preparation for the coxes too, and we've not really talked about the cox battle that we've got here between Kate Crowley, who's coxing the Winnie the Pooh crew, on the right hand side of your picture, Louis Deneve, who you've got on the left hand side of your picture. I can just hear Matthew Pinson there asking them to paddle bow 4, so with half the crew, just to take that speed off it, not to hit the line too early and make sure that they can line up in a straight line. And no stake boats here, because that's the other element that is brand new on the day. Grace, I need to ask you about this, because they won't have that person that's there holding them for this round. That is a new feature on race day.
Yeah, that's something that if you haven't done it before, it is the first time on race day, on the actual boat race, but you obviously have a few chances to practice it in the lead up, but today we won't have that. But it's a lot to get your head around. It's a lot. I think it's this high pressure moment at the start from an already very stressful moment.
And do the Coxes talk through that? Do they pretend almost that we're coming onto the stake boats? This is what I'll be asking you to do at this moment. Is that already happening now in the year before?
Yeah, we did, because I think everyone is very aware. You want this to feel as close to the boat race as possible. So to get the sort of nerves and that all sort of running through your head for these 16 athletes is so important.
Yeah, Louis Deneuve on the left of your picture with his hand up, indicating to Matthew Pinson he's not quite ready. These two crews are wearing the same kit, rather frustratingly. Normally one of them wears white. So we'd be talking about the crew on the left of your picture. That's the Surrey Bank, Eeyore, and the crew on the right of your picture. That's the Middlesex Bank, Winnie the Pooh. And we'll also be talking and referring to them either by their cocks. Louis Deneuve, he's on the left of your picture with his hand up, and Kate Crowley, the Australian, is at the back of the boat on Middlesex.
It looked to me, Martin, like they were sort of drifting towards the Middlesex bank somewhat. They've just had to correct here.
Go!
And we have a go in the Cambridge Trial 8 race. You heard Matthew Pinsent just shout the go, and there we are back live with our pictures. Good clean start from both crews. Normally you do see sometimes a little crab where the crews might slow down off the start, but looks like a good start from the crew on Middlesex. That is Winnie the Pooh, coxed by Kate Crowley, the 21-year-old Australian. Looks to have a little bit of a lead, Camilla.
Yeah, a little bit of a lead, and lots of boat race experience for Kate. She was the Blondie Cox, the reserve crew Cox in 2023, and then this year in March she coxed the lightweight crew for Cambridge, so knows this course well, and they have just got that jump start. But that often is the case with that Middlesex bend. They want to make it the advantage, because you'll see as the river disappears off into the horizon, it is the bend for them first. And so I think quite often it's the unfavoured station, in inverted commas, from the toss, but it is the one where you get that first advantage.
Yeah, well, she's leapt out, hasn't she, Claire Collins, the American stroke, and got that lead. How significant is that at this stage of the race, Grace?
I think it's quite significant, but also I think the other crew on the Surrey side does know that this is quite a mental game at the start. They know they've got the inside corner and then really have to hang on around this massive Hammersmith bend. So actually I think if you're on the Surrey side and you're a little bit behind, sometimes it can be not too panicking, and I kind of think that's what it looks like it's happened here. It looks like Surrey has sort of settled into a rhythm and might be either stopping them from moving out even more, or actually maybe clawing their way back a little bit.
Just looking at them, Camilla, it looks like Claire Collins, the American, she's got such a long stroke. She's really quite powerful in the finish. And just comparing her to the stroke in the Eeyore crew, that's on the left of your picture, Sam Morton, not quite as dramatic send and not quite the length through at the back end that Claire is showing at stroke of that crew on Middlesex.
Yeah, and look, I think that's really important for these crews, which are effectively scratch crews, right? They'll have been in these crews maybe a couple of times through this week, but ultimately they've been in smaller boats, fours, pairs, other eights. The first time that they'll have come together as this combination will have been in the last week or so. And so you've got to, as a stern pair, so as a stroke with Claire Collins, Eloise Etherington, the youngster that you spoke about behind, needs that maturity to let the rest of the crew follow, and giving that little bit more time, I think, can always play to your advantage.
Yeah, we're seeing the crew on Surrey there in the stroke seat, Sam Morton, and then we've got the reverse angle shot behind her, the long hair of Caris Ann Earl, 22-year-old Jess Beanie, 22, holding down the sixth seat, and they've got a big job now, this crew on Surrey Eeyore, because gradually you can see it, can't you? Winnie the Pooh on Middlesex are starting to break contact. At 5 in that boat, we have got Sophia Hahn, the American-German, 24 years of age. Angela Naujoks, the 20-year-old, in the 4-seat. Molly Foxall, 23 and 24, Blondie rower. Katie Hempson, the 23-year-old, in the 2-seat. And then right up on that crew on the left-hand side, Caroline Rieschke, 22 years of age. She's got 3 nationalities as well, French, New Zealand and British. So this is looking to be pretty decisive to me, Grace.
Yeah, very decisive. And if they can make their move now and then also get the next inside bend, it's going to be very, very hard for the Surrey crew to come back. And also mentally, it's very hard when you start to lose sight of the other crew as an athlete, and you might not get to see their puddles anymore, and it can be very difficult to have that confidence that you can push back. And that's where Louis really needs to kind of communicate with his crew at the moment on where they are and if they're moving. But also it's a tough job for a coxswain to cox when they're behind as well.
So we are probably something like, well, you can see the little screen on the top, 4.5 minutes into this Cambridge University women's boat race trial. I'm Martin Cross, with me Camilla Hadland-Horrocks, and Olympic champion and boat race winner Grace Prendergast. You're looking at the crew on Middlesex, Winnie the Pooh. Well, at the moment we're looking at the Surrey crew, to be fair, but the crew on Middlesex are leading this race by almost a length, and this crew here on Surrey have got a huge job to do to stop them getting away by more than a length, because they then want to tuck in and get advantage of the Surrey bend, which is coming up. You can see Hammersmith Bridge just in the background there, and the crews will start to turn towards our left as we're looking at it.
There's quite a lot of bump and wash here as we come in towards this bend, and I can't tell whether that's because of the wind, but it doesn't strike me as being a wind issue, or whether this is to do with the fact that the river is open during trialates, right? You get some river traffic, they don't close it like they do on boat race day, so whatever traffic is coming is what you're going to get sort of given as a race course here, and it is getting choppy.
I was just looking at that drone shot and I'm thinking they've got a lot of a lead, but actually we're not. The drone wasn't quite following these two crews. It is about a length now, Grace.
It is, and they've been relatively courteous with the coxswain, I think. Kate's not trying to cut in front too much. She's still hanging out and playing it safe on the outside, and sometimes that's the job of the coxswain, is actually maybe we'll take the outside.
And what should we say about the rate? Eeyore, who the crew on this side of the course, they're up at 34. Winnie the Pooh have just moved from 32.5 to 34, but they were a little bit lower. Should we just say they're kind of taking it easy until they get round and have a push?
I don't know if it'll be feeling easy, but it looks, to be honest, even both crews on 34, it does look like the Surrey crew is rating higher despite being on the same rate. I think the crew on Middlesex looks like they've got a little bit more time, a little bit more ratio, and that is a little bit easier to do when you are out in front as well.
And I guess once you're into a rhythm, like we say, this crew is gaining minutes of experience as a crew with every stroke that goes by. You might start out at 32, get yourself consolidated and together, and then Claire Collins might have decided, well, do you know what, in combination with Kate Crowley going, I think we can lift it a little bit more, I think we can make it a little bit more lively.
Yeah, 100%, and I also think they'll be very aware of where they are in the race at the moment, and this is probably where they can really shut it down. If they can stay on the outside but keep moving away, it's going to be hard for the inside crew to have that confidence to be like, oh, we can come back. So maybe they just wanted to bump it up a couple points to be really dominant while they're on the outside.
Yeah, just a point of interest, listening to Matt Pinsent's briefing to the Coxes before the race, he did suggest that they kind of needed to have a length of clear water before the leading crew cut in ahead and basically send dirty water, the swirls from the puddles, down. And we've seen boat races where Coxes have moved in front, you know, Jasper Parrish when he coxed, I think it's your race.
My crew, yeah.
How much did he have? Like a foot of clear water or something?
Yeah, a really confident foot he was. Yeah, this is probably the most courteous coxswain I've seen in years for the boat race, on trialates and the boat race. She's starting to kind of come across now and cut across, but yeah, it's
Do you know what though, Grace? I can't decide whether she's cutting across or whether actually it's the crew on Surrey that are drifting out as well, because they are giving the bank quite a wide berth. These two crews are really quite far across from where we'd expect to see them usually.
The thing I'd say about Eeyore on Surrey is their recovery is quite loose and fluid. You know, they don't look under enormous pressure, and you know, if they are going to come back, and of course those 8 women and Louis Deneuve in the Cox's seat will desperately hope they start to get an overlap. That looseness forward will give them the ability to drive that boat through the power phase of the stroke. But at the moment they're not moving.
And this is the point on this big Surrey, but this is the advantage you wait for, right? This is why you choose Surrey when you win the toss. This is exactly what Eeyore will have been waiting for, is this huge bend, like being on the inside of a running track. You get that little bit more kind of distance through and round this next couple of kilometres. But unless they're starting to see any payoff for the work that they're putting in, it is going to get quite demoralising. And like you say, Martin, can get quite laborious. And almost if you're chasing it, it gets worse before it gets better.
Yeah, so we should give a name check to the crew in front. Winnie the Pooh in the bow, so she's, from the drone shot you can see Polly Sharrock, the British Cypriot who learned to row aged 10 in Florence. And then in front of her is the enormously experienced Gemma King, who won the boat race this year and has rowed in lightweight boat races. She's done so well to make the actual boat race crew. She's going again this year. Liz Stiller, the 18-year-old, in the 3 seats, and it's been fantastic to see how she's done so well to get in this crew. Mia Frensham, 23-year-old German at 5. Natasha Morris, who qualified the British Olympic 8. You can just see her in the foreground. Natasha, 24 years of age. She was didn't quite make the Olympic team. Annie Wertheimer at 24, the American, and we've already talked about Eloise Etherington, the 18-year-old, and she comes highly recommended. She was in the British quad that took a silver medal in the junior championships, and she's been called by Junior Rowing News one of the finest quads rowers on the circuit, be it raw power, technical mastery, or sheer determination. We are looking at the crew who are behind there. I guess that's because the camera is on that side. Claire Collins in the stroke seat, and of course the 21-year-old Aussie Kate Crowley in the Cox's seat. And to my money, they've got this race won in the bag. Here's the headwind coming down here. I cannot see that crew closing the gap. Someone say something different.
No, I agree. It has grown, actually, which is not the position that you want to be in if you're in Eeyore's shoes on Surrey, but certainly the Middlesex crew, if you can, whilst on the outside, you know, this is not your bend, you can put that distance in, and every single stroke that's being taken now, the distance is growing. But the one sort of thing I do want to say about the Eeyore crew, which is the trailing crew on your left here behind, the waves are getting much bigger, for first thing. We thought that the wind was quite benign, but would you look at that? The second thing is, 5 out of the 9 of this crew, including the Cox, learned to row at Cambridge, which is very different to the other crew, where we've got a lot of international experience, a lot of people who've been rowing since their junior years, you know. Lots of these athletes only started to row at sort of 18.
Yeah, we just saw a missed stroke there, didn't we, from, I think, Molly Foxall, it might have been. Sorry to pick that out, Molly, on the in the 3 seat, just hitting the blades on this rough water, Grace.
Yeah, as we said at the start, we were like, they've got such a nice day, but it's actually quite choppy here, and you're seeing this trailing crew just struggle a little bit, and I imagine also the crew out in front will be as well, but we're just not seeing that as much. But yeah, I think this is when the pain is starting to kick in. You're starting to really struggle, but you've got to be so clean.
And I guess looking at those ratings, you know, now we're in the headwind. We were 34 coming out to Hammersmith Bridge. Well, Winnie the Pooh, the leading crew, is at 31, and Eeyore trying to make up are at 32 strokes a minute. That's got to say something, Grace.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think as you get into that headwind, sometimes actually spinning it and keeping that rate high isn't going to make you go faster. I think now the leading crew is probably able to really make sure they're getting a hold of it, they're connecting and they're moving, which is going to naturally maybe drop you down a point or two.
Does look a bit tired, Eeyore, doesn't it?
Well, it's quite close to the water. They look like yeah.
Yeah, I just think the vibrancy of the drive through, it's lost something that they had just before Hammersmith Bridge. In that headwind's really taken a lot out of them, and I think Winnie the Pooh, with Claire Collins and the 18-year-old Etherington in the 7 seat behind her. I mean, they're rowing really long, aren't they? But they're just that bit more vibrant through the water.
Grace, that was interesting what you just said there. They're a little bit closer to the water. Now, as somebody that's come from flat water rowing on lakes to a stadium like this where you've got the tideway, you've got the tide, you've got the wind, and when they combine, you can get what is akin to sometimes coastal rowing, sea-like waves. Did you have to change your rowing style coming into the boat race to adapt to these kind of conditions?
Yeah, it was actually not a battle I had with Paddy, the coach, the whole season, but I spent the whole season being like, I want to be rigged low, I like to be low to the water, it's much easier to get in. Whereas he spent the whole season being like, well, if you end up on the tideway on a really rough day, you're going to regret that. So it's that balance of being like, actually, this is a really different body of water. And if you get halfway through the race and the conditions change and you can no longer clear the water, it's going to be detrimental.
So, Grace, who was right, you or Paddy?
In the end, I'm quite stubborn. And we had quite a flat day, so it worked in my favour. But there were a lot of conversations about it.
But, Claire Collins, who's come from an international, American team setup over the last 2 Olympiads, having gone to Tokyo and Paris, you were in the stern pair, she's currently in the stern pair. She's probably gone through a very similar transition of being in that, lake rowing, flat water rowing, to this. And to put someone like that in the stroke seat, I think shows a lot of confidence that Paddy probably has in her.
It really does. I actually popped down to talk to the Cambridge women yesterday, and we had a bit of like a question and answer, and one of the questions she asked was like, well, what's the difference, or did you approach the boat race different than you did international racing? And I was like, it's so different. Like, you don't get other races internationally where you may have to do a burst that is well and truly above the sort of intensity that you can hold and then drop down, but a race like this, it throws so many different things at you, so that's why this is so important. They're going to have the opportunity to practice all of this.
I think Eeyore's cohesiveness is still there. I mean, we've still got the lock pretty similar around the front ends. It looks a little bit more dynamic now they've lost that rough water, and certainly Louis Deneuve, the 21-year-old, fairly newbie cox, I think he's been coxing for a couple of years, will be using that extra drive and pace to kind of get his crew closer to Winnie the Pooh out there in front.
So the crew out in front, Martin, we've now got Winnie the Pooh approaching Barnes Railway Bridge, and this really is kind of last chance saloon, isn't it, really, for the chasing crew, for Eeyore, to make any dent. And we've seen crews in the past on boat race day close the gap in this it's not even last third of the race really, it's less than, but it's very hard at this point if you're behind to overturn a margin as you come underneath this final bridge.
Yeah, what, you've got 3 minutes or something like that between Barnes Bridge, and got a lovely line there. Kate Crowley coxed the lightweight boat last year. I'm not sure if they won or not, but she has coxed Blondie, so this would be a great opening of the boat race campaign for her, the woman from Adelaide in South Australia, really coxing a victorious trial 8. I mean, it doesn't get you in the boat race, Grace, but
No, it doesn't. I think there's still a lot of the season to go, but it is, I think even for Louis, this is going to be great experience, because there's nothing like coxing a crew that's behind, and you're going to learn a lot, and also just being able to go back and debrief which lines did I take, what was the right moves, where could I improve, is going to be so important. And often actually the most important part of the trial 8 is that sort of post brief on what did both crews do well, why did one win, what could the other do better.
Water's cutting up there a little bit, and you can see just the blades hitting the water, and that conversation that Grace and Camilla were having. So relevant, isn't it, in terms of the height these women have got to clear the water with, and how they're rigged in the boat.
Yeah, and look, you can see Carousel there, who's at 7, who's kind of trying to transfer the rhythm back from Sammy Morton in the stroke seat. I think that's a really good place to put your experienced boat race head, is in that 7 seat, and Paddy's probably been quite deliberate in doing that. She is the only returner in that boat, only one of 2 returners with Gemma King, who we were mentioning earlier, across the whole squad. So I think it's pretty pivotal where you choose to put those people who have got that experience to relay it back. And Grace, you're a 7 seat, right, having come in, having never done a boat race before, so a very different tactic when you did your year.
Yeah, but then I think we were very fortunate to have Imogen in the stroke seat, but I think it is who's a well-seasoned boat race campaigner. But I think it is really important to have someone in that stern pair who can communicate with the coxswain, because obviously the coxswain can only see one way, and if they're being warned or anything like that, that sort of level of communication is really important. This is quite a good angle to see how difficult it is. Sometimes it's hard to see how choppy it is, but the crews are still battling quite tricky water. And this is where, even when you're out in front, you need to make sure you don't relax too much and don't get too complacent, because you don't know what's going to happen.
The beauty of this course, right, it is one of the most iconic rowing courses in the world. Not only, I think the boat race makes it that, but people come from all over the world to race on this stretch of water. But we were saying at the start, the water was nothing like this, and you can get 4 different seasons in a race. This race that is near on 20 minutes long. You have to be prepared to deal with everything and anything, and make the best average out of what you've been dealt for the day.
So we are coming to the end of this Cambridge Women's Trial 8s race for the 2025 boat race. Chiswick Bridge, well, that's just the other side of the finishing line. The finish post is just before that, but it will be very welcome for the Winnie the Pooh crew who are out there in front. Kate Crowley, the Cox, Claire Collins, Eloise Etherington, Annie Wertheimer, Tash Morris, Mia Frensham, Liz Stiller, Gemma King and Polly Sharrock in the bow seat. There you see them. Polly Sharrock is on the left of your picture, and they've all got those lovely yellow headbands, and they are driving that. Claire Collins, that is a really vibrant sort of way of rowing, isn't it?
I mean, you would not have thought that this crew has only been together for a matter of days. That is a really stunning way to pull a crew together, and hats off not only to the stern pair but to Kate Crowley and the Cox's seat to get the best out of all 8 athletes in front of her, to make it look like a cohesive unit. That's exactly what you want out of a Trial 8 performance.
Yeah, it looks impressive. Like them crossing the finish line, I was like, that looks like a rhythm that you would be happy to take into the boat race. So I think it bodes very well. And then you go and combine these 2 crew with the best 8 athletes. I think it's an exciting start for Cambridge rowing.
Oh, so someone's got a hand up there. Was that Tash Morris? That's not an objection, is it?
I suppose it could be for anything, right, Martin? Yeah. It could be medical assistants, could be, so we'll wait and see. But, actually, I think it might have them just been saying well done to each other, in fact. Yeah. I just saw a hand up as well there. And I think those nice sort of blondie scrunchies are actually what is the defining factor between the 2 crews. You were talking about white tops versus blue tops. I think it's actually the scrunchies that is the crew kit.
Well, I think if I had an electron microscope, I might have been able to spot that on some of the drone shots.
Yeah, it didn't help us as the commentators, but we got there in the end. It was fine. But no, I think no huge celebrations all round, and we're about halfway through boat race season, right? Like, these guys would have started training end of August into September. We're now at this sort of quite crucial December point where they're about to go off for their Christmas university holidays. Grace, at this point, winning crew, losing crew. I don't know what crew you were in when you did Trial 8s.
I was fortunately in the winning.
Yeah, that's good. What do you take away from this as an athlete going into the winter break?
I think it's really important. I think you're either going to take away some really good learnings, whether you win or lose. I also think it's really important to take away as a whole squad that these 16 athletes are essentially the ones that are going to be in contention for the top 8. So sort of having that lasting moment before you go away and have a holiday and then come back for training camp post New Year's kind of sets you up, and I think it builds the excitement, and it just kind of feels like, yes, the boat race is here, we're ready, we're excited for it.
So here are some highlights. This is off the start, and you can see as they're approaching, we're based at London Rowing Club, which is at Putney, and they're just coming past our commentary point, and you can see from very early on the Middlesex crew, Winnie the Pooh, stroked by Claire Collins, do have that narrow lead.
I think throughout the race, though, Martin, looking at them rowing there, yes, I know that they were a lower rating, but they're not quite as on it as they were around the front end, getting their blades in, as they were when we saw them come past the finish post, right? Like, they spent that entire race clearly trying to get as much length, as much sort of stability, because you need confidence in a crew to get right out there around the pin, around the catch. And they built that clearly throughout the race, because they were being quite tentative with putting their blades in there off the start, but by the end, they looked like a really well-formed crew.
Yeah, they almost looked like a different crew, and it would have been, obviously they did enough work at the start to get in front, but it would have been interesting if they would have had that confidence to do that if they were behind, because when you're out in front, you have a little bit more confidence to settle and relax and row a little bit longer and hold on to it a little bit more.
Yeah, and it's interesting, what from Paddy Ryan's point of view, I mean, clearly I would imagine he's going to have Claire Collins in the stroke seat of his blue boat. Well, Annie Wertheimer was in the 6th seat behind Claire Collins, but that connection between stroke and 6 with the 18-year-old Etherington, she's rowing really long. We know she's got a great rhythm, because Paddy's told us, and it's worked, that stern 3 combination. So I'm not sure whether the youngster will make the blue boat, but it's given Paddy a few things to think about, hasn't it?
Yeah, it definitely has. And, Claire Collins, like you say, of course, I think she's great money to have for the stroke seat. She was the stroke seat of the head of the Charles crew as well. So I think with all things considered, with both big races that you've had so far in the season, to have been placed at stroke for both of those, it's pretty telling, I think, that's... Looking at this, we've got the entire crew from that top crew at head of the Charles racing here. The fact that they've all made it through without illness, injury, that in itself is a huge achievement for the Cambridge squad.
It's a really impressive achievement, and I know there has been a lot of injury and illness, but for them not to be affected, I think maybe it shows that once you get to that point in your career, you're a little bit more experienced. They're doing something right and something well.
I think Kate wound them down early, actually, for this one. I mean, I love that finish drive. It looks great, fantastic. There's the finish post. Like, what's Kate doing?
They'll be watching this back, Martin, and going, oh.
Yeah,
we did miss a couple of strokes there.
Through the line, and there we see the trailing crew, Eeyore, coming across the line, and